Hello, I'm ANEKA from Made to Sew. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do a 4-step buttonhole. Now, I don't actually own a sewing machine that does a 4-step buttonhole, so I have borrowed one for this tutorial. Do take a look at your machine to see whether you have a 4-step buttonhole function or a 1-step or automatic buttonhole function. Either are absolutely fine, it's just slightly a different method of producing it. So, I'm going to take you to the machine that I'm using and we can begin. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a buttonhole stitch with a sewing machine that has a 4-step buttonhole function. This is one of the buttonholes created on this sewing machine. This machine does a 4-step buttonhole. You will need to manually choose stitch 1, 2, 3 and 4 to create the buttonhole. And you can see the stitches on this stitch selector here. When it comes to the length, you are going to need to bring it to the buttonhole, which is about 0.5 millimeters. You have the ability to amend the length from closer to 0 and closer to 1. This is going to reduce the length of the stitch. Ideally, you want the stitches to be nice and close together, but you still want to make sure that the fabric is feeding through the sewing machine. So you may want to have a little play with the length based on the fabric and thread that you're working with. This is the buttonhole foot on this machine. To position the foot on, I will need to bring my foot down onto the bar and press the little lever at the back, just like so. You're going to want to have the needle thread underneath the foot, so hold on to the needle thread. Turn the hand wheel towards you so that the needle goes down all the way back up. Grab an unpicker or a little pin to scoop out the threads from underneath. Just like so. You want the threads to the side or the back of the sewing machine. Now I've prepared my piece of fabric by marking my buttonhole with a removable pen. So I've got my vertical line, which is the center line of my buttonhole and where I want it to be positioned. And then I've got 2 horizontal lines, one at the start and one at the end of the buttonhole. Now you need to decide on the size of your buttonhole before doing this method on this sewing machine, because you will need to inform the machine and change the stitch from the sides of the button to the ends of the button. If you're unsure about what size to draw, then I do recommend that you watch my Introduction to Buttonholes video. I've got some stabilizer behind my fabric and I recommend using stabilizer or interfacing to support this. Now, with this buttonhole method, you need to push this silver piece towards you so that the white part of the foot is sort of sitting at the back of the silver piece. This is incorrect. This is correct. There is a little red arrow on the plastic white piece and you want that to be in line with the red markings on the silver piece. Now these are centimetre markings in 0.5 centimetres and they're there to help you when you are sewing the buttonhole. You'll see in a second. Position the fabric underneath. Now we need to line up the vertical line to the middle of the buttonhole in the middle of this sort of gap that you see in the silver section. Now the white plastic bit that sort of is underneath the needle or underneath this piece that attaches it to the machine, there is a sort of bat wing, a sort of dip. You want that to be in line with the central vertical line of the buttonhole. And you can do this very cautiously, put your foot down, have a little look, lift it back up, reposition it. Now you're going to want to choose stitch 1 on this machine because this machine sews the left-hand side first towards you. Do check the direction and the method that your machine sews in. Now I want my needle, if I turn the hand wheel, to go into that top horizontal line that you've drawn, the start of the buttonhole. And again, when I position my foot down, I want to make sure that my vertical line is coming straight towards me in the middle of the foot. The needle may or may not go into the fabric where the horizontal and vertical lines join. Because this is a zigzag stitch, it is going to move to the left if I show you. So it could be going in like so. Just make sure that the needle starts on the horizontal line and your central vertical line is in the center of the foot and in line with that little bat wing. Now we can sew, and you are simply going to guide the fabric into the machine. No pushing or pulling here. You want to be nice and consistent so that you end up with a consistent stitch on your buttonholes and you don't change the length of the stitches. This is when you can have a play with the length if you want to. Turn it closer to 0, the stitches will be closer together. Closer to 1, the stitches will form more of a zigzag and be further apart. Make sure that your fabric is still feeding through your sewing machine though. If you go too close to 0, your fabric will stop feeding through the sewing machine and you will sew a large lump, and unfortunately you will have to unpick. Keep a medium speed as you're sewing this. You don't want to go too quickly. Now, you're going to need to stop when you reach your other horizontal line for the end of your buttonhole. This is where these guides on the left come in handy. If you are working with centimeters, then when the red arrow goes in line with the red line, you will know that you have sewn a buttonhole that's 2.5 centimeters long. So something to be aware of. You don't necessarily, therefore, need to actually mark a horizontal line at the end of the buttonhole if you're happy using these. I just feel that it does help. Stop sewing with the needle on the left hand stitch, just like so. Make sure that the needle is raised and then turn your dial to stitch 2. Now you're going to sew a larger stitch that's going to secure the bottom of the buttonhole. You want to sew about 5 of these, and you want to stop sewing with your needle on a right stitch. If you need to, please use the hand wheel, turn it towards you, and I have stopped sewing on a right stitch there. Now I'm going to change my dial to stitch 3. Now this is going to do the same as stitch 1, but it's going to sew away from me. And I just need to again guide everything through the machine. No pushing or pulling here, just holding it nice and flat and straight. Now you may find on some machines that the buttonhole stitches on both sides are slightly different, and unfortunately that can just be the machine that you're working on. Now when you get back to the start, so we're back at the horizontal line at the start and the arrow is lined up with the red marker on the silver piece, we're going to want to have the needle finish on a right stitch. Turn the dial to stitch number 4, which is the same as stitch number 2, and you're going to sew a larger zigzag across the end of the buttonhole. Again, about 5 or so stitches. Finish with the needle raised. To finalize the buttonhole and to secure everything, I recommend that you actually put your stitch selector back to a straight stitch, which is stitch A on this sewing machine. I could actually use stitch A or stitch B. Stitch A has the needle in the middle, stitch B has the needle on the left. Just make sure whichever stitch you use, the needle is going to be going into the previous sewing. You don't want it to sew away from the buttonhole. You want it to disappear into the buttonhole that you've sewn. Keep the length the same. So my length is probably about 0.2, 0.3, and sew 2 to 3 stitches on top of each other. And this is just going to lock that stitching and make sure that your buttonhole doesn't come undone. And there you have it. Lift up the foot and pull out your buttonhole. Give the hand wheel a little wiggle if you need to, and there it is. Feel free to either cut the threads off, or to secure them even more, position the threads into a needle. I like to use these easy threading needles for this, and take it through to the wrong side of the fabric. At the wrong side, you can tie the threads together in a little knot. For extra security, you could again rethread your needle and thread this up the back of the stitching. If you've worked with a stabilizer, you can obviously remove this, and then you can cut open the buttonhole. If you want to learn more about a couple of different methods of doing this, then do head over to my introduction to buttonhole video, where I show you how to do this, how to prevent fraying, and lots of other tips. Now you have your working buttonhole, you would check the size of the buttonhole against your button, and then complete the same for the rest of the buttons on the product that you're doing. If you're doing lots of buttons the same size, I would recommend that you always sew them in the same direction on the fabric and using a similar speed on the sewing machine. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you feel more confident doing your buttonholes.